McGraw-Hill Professional presents The Network Always Wins: How to Influence Customers, Stay Relevant, and Transform Your Organization to Move Faster Than the Market. Written by Peter Hinssen. Narrated by John Haag. Preface: Why Networks Matter. Since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with maps. I adore the layout of old maps depicting mountains and oceans, cities and roads. I find it fascinating how world history can be seen through the shifting borders of maps over time. But nowadays, what amazes me most is how old cartographers got it wrong. One of my favorite examples is the way California has been depicted, having lived there for part of my childhood. For the longest time, travelers believed that California was an island, separate from the American mainland. My favorite type of map is the road map, whether it shows layouts of city streets or depicts how railroads and highways, roads and turnpikes, lanes and pathways curve through the landscape of countries and continents. For me, the best part of the Lord of the Rings books is the amazingly intricate maps drawn by J.R.R. Tolkien, which let you follow the trail of the Merry Fellowship on their journey to Mordor. But moving on from my Hobbit habits, when you look more closely at the topology of maps, it's clear that roads form a network. The infrastructure of how cities operate, their capacity and connections, tell the story of the economy and influence of a region. You can see which cities are at the heart of an economy and which are at the edge. You can understand how influential a town is, what its main economic arteries and roads are, and how it influences, stimulates, and feeds neighboring towns and hamlets. I now spend countless hours poring over Google Maps and Google Earth. I love exploring regions that I visited or will visit, ogling the enormous beauty and complexity of the roads and canals, and the intricacy of the routes and freeways. All of this was made by man. When it comes to the mountains and lakes, the volcanoes and harbors, the plateaus and cliffs, we had nothing to do with those. But all the rest, that was us. We created these networks that carry our cars, wagons, trucks, boats, buses, bicycles, and pedestrians. There was no grand plan, as is made obvious by the myriad twists and turns and the fractal-like complexity of the network. There are exceptions, of course. The German autobahns were created through a grand scheme, and the U.S. interstate highway system copied the idea. These pathways seem more logical than the rest of the infrastructure, which seems almost organic. But their impact is immense. The U.S. interstate system helped shape the United States into a world economic superpower and a highly industrialized nation. In newer economies like that of the United States, you tend to see more deliberate structure and order. Cities such as New York or Chicago are laid out on grid patterns, for example. It's much easier to find the corner of 57th Street and 5th Avenue in New York than the intersection of Avenida de Lanzarote and Calle Nicaragua in Madrid. Over hundreds, sometimes thousands of years, these networks have grown and connected cities and towns and have become the lifeblood of our economies. We hardly realize that anymore. On the contrary, we notice it only when it fails, when we're stuck in traffic, trying to get into or out of a city, and cursing the designers of these blasted roads, traffic signals, or bypasses. But the truth is, these infrastructure networks are the heart of our economies. They transport employees to their jobs, children to their schools, produce to the warehouses, and eBay purchases to your front door. Without these networks, there would be no economy, no global society, no wealth, and no prosperity. But today, the roads on a map tell only a tiny part of the story. They tell the tale of the physical part of our economies. As Nicholas Negroponte would say, the transport of atoms. Unseen by the naked eye, superimposed on these visible networks, are countless invisible networks. Wireless networks that connect people, phones, tablets, and other devices. Radio and television networks that relay music and video across the globe. Telecommunications networks that connect satellites, bringing continents and remote areas together. Electricity networks that bring power from wind turbines at sea to homes, or watts from nuclear plants to factories. Information networks that relay more and more content and knowledge at increasingly breakneck speeds. What we see when we gaze upon our planet are man-made infrastructure networks that took hundreds of years to form. And if you could observe the spectrum of communications networks on top of that, you would find layer upon layer of networks created over the last century that have grown to a similar level of complexity and delicacy. All are expressions of humankind, our collective actions as a civilization. I have become obsessed with networks, their absolute power and their pure simplicity. So this book is about networks, why I have come to believe in them as the most fundamental driver of progress, and why we have to understand networks if we want to survive the next era of society. I believe that networks will win. Networks always win. We're witnessing a revolution in the way society works. Many people, including me, thought at first that this was because of digital technology, that we were witnessing the advent of a new society, with digital natives leading the way, and the toddler who can swipe an iPad as its poster boy. We were wrong. It's not because of digital technology. It's because of networks. What is happening in front of our eyes is that everything is becoming connected to everything else. Information is flowing through networks with greater intensity, and that completely changes everything. Markets are disappearing, becoming networks of information with the customer at their heart. And if the outside world becomes a network, companies will have to follow suit. That's the punchline, plain and simple. If you understand networks, you will understand the future. Peter Hinssen. Let's get started. About the network always wins. In this book, we'll explore what it means to become a network organization and how to influence consumers who behave as active elements of a network, not passive targets of a market. We'll examine what it takes to match the speed of network thinking and how to transform your organization to maintain its relevance in the age of networks. But on a deeper level, this book is about much more. This is a book about speed, about what happens when markets move faster than you can control or even observe, so that you will have to move faster without either absolute visibility or absolute control. This is a book about consumers, about the shift that takes place when they stop simply consuming and start interacting, and when markets stop being markets and become networks of intelligence. But this is also a book about organizations, about what will happen when we have to adapt the inside of our companies to markets that are changing faster than ever before. We will have to adopt this network thinking inside our own organizations. This is not a book that is meant to frighten you. It was written to make you more alert, to open your eyes to what is probably the biggest shift we've ever seen in society, the biggest shift ever to hit the world of commerce, and the biggest shift in how we build organizations. This is really a survival guide designed to teach you the new rules of the land, about the new patterns, the new cultures, and the new behaviors, and how to reinvent your company after your market has flipped and turned network. This is not a technical book, Don't expect any detailed discussions of the technical aspects of networks, the routing of TCP/IP packets, or the tweaking of 4G wireless routers. This is a business book. We'll dive into some physics and mathematics here and there. First, because the stories are really good, and second, because they will make you feel pretty good about yourself for having read a book with some equations in it. But above all, this is a book about our world and what is happening all around us, a book on how we and our children can survive in a world in which information is ubiquitous. We will have to figure out how to dismantle the old industrial structures that now form the pillars of our economy, and rethink how companies, organizations, and society function. And perhaps the answer to understanding our future is right in front of our very eyes. We only have to gaze upon ourselves and observe the networks that we have built. What I got wrong in the new normal. I've become obsessed with S-curves. A typical S-curve has two really interesting parts. At first, the movement is slow, but then it suddenly picks up and starts to rise exponentially. Think about the uptick in smartphone owners recently, or the number of users on Facebook. The speed increases and grows exponentially. There's no stopping the momentum, and it promises to go on forever. But then the magical moment happens, and a flip occurs. The S-curve starts to slow down. Growth is still fast, but it's moving in the opposite direction from the first half. And when we get into the second half, we see a stabilizing factor where growth eventually tops off. Many markets have followed this phenomenon. One of the best studies of S-curves was done by Carlota Perez, technology expert and author. She applied these curves to the growth in railways, the automobile market, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of electricity, and the growth in computing power. That's what caught my attention. I wrote The New Normal on the rise of digital and what happens when digital passes the halfway mark and becomes normality. In other words, this was digital's path along the S-curve. In the beginning, when digital was still new, its growth was slow. Only the true nerds were hunched over primitive microcomputers like the Apple II, the Commodore 64, and the Atari. Normal folks would look at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. But then the market caught fire. The pace picked up, and suddenly everyone had a computer. First desktops, then laptops, and now tablets. And digital became normal. Older people still remember when digital was a meaningful adjective. Younger people don't. Everything is digital. Analog is the exception. And then we get into the second part of the S-curve, a world where we take digital for granted. Companies that don't adapt become obsolete in a world that is governed by Google and Twitter, and where the breakneck speed of keeping up with digital is rapidly revealing the incredible slowness and immobility of some organizations. The New Normal was a book about what happens when digital becomes normal, about the flip to a digital world. But it also got me hooked on S-curves, and I now believe that this is much bigger than just digital. This is way beyond the world of iPhones, Spotify, and Facebook. Technology is just one example of markets that flip. Digital was just the appetizer. The flip is a broad concept about what happens when markets start to move faster than companies. In one sentence, this book is about how to survive the flip. Chapter 1. The Age of Uncertainty. Building a culture of experimentation means implementing an attitude toward risk that will be necessary if we are to survive in a world in which strategy becomes fluid. We would love to build a model that describes everything about our markets, customers, and organizations, and use that model to build the perfect strategy for the future. Unfortunately, that doesn't work, and it never will. The future is characterized by VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Therefore, no model will ever suffice. Instead, we have to focus on building agility, acting fast, and nurturing creative thinking by stimulating our company's networks and adopting a culture of experimentation. The holy grail for many companies is to build the ultimate knowledge tool. This is a mythical spreadsheet that companies hope to use in order to build an all-encompassing model of their enterprise. They could feed into it all the inputs of their business, insights into the behavior of their customers, and all the relevant knowledge about trends in their markets. From this ultimate shiny model, they would be able to deduce the perfect strategy. Nobody has yet built such a spreadsheet. No one has found the Holy Grail either, but that doesn't mean that people aren't still looking for it after 2,000 years. In the same way, companies seem to be constantly in search of the perfect strategy. In fact, strategy is the #1 category in the extremely lucrative management book market. Innovation is #2, because people quickly realize that they have to come up with something that is truly unique if they are to survive. Third on the bestseller list is self-help guides, written to help the disenchanted crowd of depressed business people who have learned that there is no ultimate strategy and no magic recipe for innovation. The theory of everything. We humans seem to be obsessed with modeling. It's our way of figuring out how things really work, and our attempt to do that by using formulas, concepts, and mechanisms. The history of physics is thousands of years of trying to figure out the elusive theory of everything, to explain it all. Physics is still trying to figure it out, and every time the physicists think they have it nailed, they find that they have to dig deeper and build more models, like the Russian Matryoshka nesting dolls. Newtonian physics worked like a charm, explaining everything from the movement of planets to the falling of apples. It seemed to be pretty much perfect, that is, until it was applied to things that were very small. For that, we needed quantum mechanics. Or how about for things that go very fast, such as light? For that, we invented the theory of relativity. Every time we dig a little deeper into physics, we understand a bit more about how the universe actually works, and we adapt our model accordingly. Physicians have been trying to understand our bodies and the complex workings of our brains for centuries. And it's true that the medical profession now knows a considerable amount more than it did in the days of bloodletting and lobotomies. But we are still light years away from being able to model the human brain. Yet we humans are a persistent bunch. We won't stop until we've built that ultimate model of our gray matter. In business, we also try to model everything. For years, economists have been trying to model markets, companies, processes, anything, really. They've been trying to create models that would explain market behaviors, and models that would even explain the weather. They've even tried to create a magnum model of models. The Rand Corporation. One company that has always fascinated me is the Rand Corporation. This secretive organization, based in Santa Monica, California, was formed in the wake of World War II by the U.S. Department of Defense, the Air Force in particular. The Air Force viewed itself as being much more sophisticated than the Army, from which it had been spun off. The Army had troops and tanks, while the Air Force had all kinds of cool stuff, from planes to nuclear technology. In order to maintain that edge, and to maintain control of nuclear strategy, the Air Force needed a research arm. That's why the Rand Corporation was created. The Rand Corporation, short for Research and Development, was set up in 1946. Its primary goal was to help the U.S. Air Force define a strategy for the long-term planning of future weapons. In other words, during the Cold War, it would plan for nuclear war. Like the Manhattan Project before it, RAND recruited the smartest people on the planet, including more than 30 Nobel Prize winners. Since its inception, RAND has drawn upon top scientists, mathematicians, and physicists who believed in the ultimate model and in the ultimate chance to use mathematics to shape the universe and the future. The charged atmosphere at the RAND Corporation during the 50s must have been exhilarating and intoxicating, with the sharpest minds of the free world working to figure out how to remain free and win a nuclear war. One of the most colorful and influential figures in the RAND Corporation was a man named Herman Kahn. Stanley Kubrick immortalized him as Dr. Strangelove in 1964. Herman Kahn was born in New Jersey, the son of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. He was raised in Los Angeles and attended UCLA, where he got a degree in physics. He was working on a Ph.D. at Caltech, but he had to drop out for financial reasons, not for lack of talent. Rumors were that he had the highest IQ ever measured. Kahn became friends with Samuel Cohen, the inventor of the neutron bomb, who introduced him to the RAND Corporation. He was recruited soon afterward, in 1947. Kahn took to RAND like a duck to water. He quickly became a major player at RAND, with a unique style. A master showman, he would deliver 12-hour lectures spread over 2 days, using huge sets of charts and slides. For more than 10 years, Kahn developed a novel technique known as systems analysis. The idea was to build the most perfect model of a strategic question by first analyzing and then synthesizing a model that could be used to run different scenarios. The verbs analyze and synthesize have Greek origins, where they mean, respectively, to take apart and to put together. That's exactly what Kahn wanted to do for nuclear strategy. The result would be a model of the Cold War that could define not only what the end game with the Russians would be, but also how much it would cost. To Kahn, it was like playing a giant game of Risk. But given the mighty computers that he had at his disposal and the enormous impact that his models had on real nuclear strategy, this game was frightfully real. By putting into his models the quantities of bombers and radar systems and the location of airfields and missiles, Kahn could calculate how many civilian deaths would result from various nuclear scenarios. He could determine how many cities would be wiped out and how much collateral damage there would be. Kahn's model of the Cold War directly influenced how many billions of dollars were allocated to the U.S. Department of Defense. But he was also calculating just how many hundreds of millions of people would perish in the event of a full-blown nuclear war. He finally published his magnum opus, called On Thermonuclear War, in 1960, the title being a reference to the classic 19th-century work by Karl von Clausewitz, On War. His boss thought Kahn had gone too far and told him that the work should be burned. However, the book provided amazing insights into the model that the RAND Corporation had built. In the first 3 months, On Thermonuclear War sold more than 14,000 copies, and it was read with great interest on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The Soviet newspaper Pravda trashed the book, calling RAND the Academy of Science and Death. However, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was a great admirer of the book and of Kahn. The amazing thing about the model that Kahn built was that it described a post-nuclear war world, a world in which, depending on the variables, hundreds of millions had died, or merely a few major cities had been destroyed. Kahn argued that life would go on, and that the survivors would not envy the dead. Just as Europe had managed to continue after the devastatingly deadly effects of the Black Death in the 14th century, Kahn believed that people would cope and that humanity would prevail. Understandably, Kahn's theory was highly controversial. Not only did he use his model to think about the world after a nuclear war, but he was also incredibly provocative in his solutions for coping in a post-nuclear Holocaust era. For example, he suggested grading food based on the amount of radioactive contamination it contained. The most highly radioactive food should be consumed primarily by the elderly, who would probably die before the delayed onset of cancers caused by radioactivity. Kahn was a nuclear provocateur, but he was a scientist first, and in the 50s it was very plausible that there would be a nuclear arm wrestling match between the United States and Russia. As Kahn put it, he was trying to design a system capable of meeting contingencies which will arise 5 to 15 years into the future. To put it differently, the Rand Corporation was trying to predict how the world would evolve, exactly what every company that is chasing that holy grail of the ultimate Excel is trying to do. The ultimate model. Kahn took advantage of the rise of digital computers, which were building up enough horsepower to be able to do those calculations, to run all those simulations, and ultimately to take the human side out of the equation. Certainly in the context of predicting the outcome of nuclear war, with possibly hundreds of millions of civilians dying, the human factor in decision-making was often disturbing. As Kahn put it, under these circumstances, competent, honest people often don't do very well. And here we come to the heart of the matter. We seem to be set on building the ultimate model, one that will guide us to the ultimate strategy and eliminate the human element in decision-making. Kahn believed that if computers got better, if technology got stronger, then he could build better and better models and get closer to that holy grail of the ultimate model. Indeed, during this period, the capabilities of computer systems were advancing by leaps and bounds. Kahn observed an exponential increase in the state-of-the-art of computer technology in the past 20 years. Little did he know that this was only the beginning of the exponential curve of technology dictated by Moore's law. Kahn also understood that the technologists who were working on these new computer systems had a habit of overestimating their ability to apply new ideas in the immediate future and underestimating the impact of their technology on the long term. Stepping into the unknown. After a falling out with the Rand Corporation in 1960, Kahn left and founded the Hudson Institute, then located in Croton-on-Hudson, New York. In his words, the Hudson Institute was to be a high-class Rand. In 1967, Kahn produced a fascinating report from the Hudson Institute called The Year 2000, a framework for speculation on the next 33 years. In it, he described 100 technical innovations that were very likely to happen. Among them were 74, pervasive business of computers; 81, personal pagers, perhaps even pocket phones; 84, home computers to run households and communicate with the outside world. If you thought that Bill Gates or Steve Jobs invented home computers, or that it took until the World Wide Web to envision something like the Internet, think again. Kahn had amazing insight, even predicting, as item 67, the commercial extraction of oil from shale. He was a bona fide genius, disliked by many for the controversies he created, but a true pioneer of models. He passed away in 1983 at the age of 61. But Herman Kahn also saw the limitations of models, that they could get you only so far. He was a great student of the history of war, and he was fascinated by the mistakes the French made in dealing with Germany in World War II.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?